All right. Thanks everyone so much for being here tonight. My name is Mindy Zacharias. I'm the program director of the Master of Public Administration program here at Fels Institute of Government at the University of Pennsylvania. And we have a real treat tonight. We have our Racial Equity and Social Justice Conversation Series led by our distinguished fellow, Matt Stitt, and very special guest, Sulaiman Rahman. I'll let Matt take it away and tell us all about our wonderful guests. But the format for tonight, we'll have interview style to begin, and then the second part will be a Q&A from the audience. If you have questions for the Q&A, you can send them to me by direct message in the chat, and then during the Q&A, I'll unmute folks. We'll prompt folks to unmute and ask their own questions. And when you give your question, also include your name and your affiliation with tonight's event. So are you an alum, a student, community member? And I think that's about it for housekeeping. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the wonderful Matt Stitt.
Thank you, Mindy, and welcome everybody from the Fels community. I think this is our third year doing this speaker series, so we're happy to be back. And I have the pleasure of introducing Sulaiman to the group. And I've known Sulaiman for a number of years in different capacities. I actually also instruct for one of his programs, which he'll go into a little bit more detail about a little bit later in our talk. But just to give a little bit of background on Sulaiman, Sulaiman is a very visionary leader, and I mean capital V visionary, and the CEO of Diverse Force. And for those who aren't familiar with Diverse Force, it's a human capital solutions firm that specializes in helping organizations to recruit, retain, engage, and develop top diverse talent. The key being diverse. Sulaiman has decades of community building experience. He founded UPPN prior to Diverse Force, now known as the BBEX Network. I hope I got that right, Sulaiman. Cool. Nice. And this is one of the area's largest and most respected professional networks with over 20,000 subscribers. And again, it's really representing that diverse talent pipeline from early career all the way up to the C-suite. Under Sulaiman's leadership, Diverse Force has launched innovative solutions for the social impact sector, including Diverse Force on boards in partnership with Penn, and Diverse Force Executive Search, which I know is the latest venture. In 2021, Sulaiman also launched the P4 Hub, which is a really big facility, over 11,000 square feet, located in actually Germantown section of Philadelphia, and serving as a high-tech and high-touch hub for advancing racial equity and excellence. Sulaiman has impressive board and committee memberships, including serves as chairman of the board for Philanthropy Charitable, a donor-advised fund, vice president of the board of directors at CCP, or Community College Philadelphia Foundation, an executive committee member of the board of directors for Mastery Charter Schools, Philadelphia Orchestra, and Kamel Center of Performing Arts, and the Lenfest Institute of Journalism. Sulaiman, you got a stacked resume. You're very familiar. He's also an alum of Penn, so he's very familiar to the Penn community. But before we get into a lot of your career or into a lot of the focused discussion today, or even to the development of Diverse Force, can you take us back to how your career began and perhaps share some pivotal experience to help shape your focus on championing diversity and equity in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. And thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. And like I said, known Matt for a number of years, and just the utmost respect for all that he's doing. So glad to be here and wouldn't miss it. And yeah, my story, actually born, raised, and stayed here in Philadelphia. First generation college student, wanted to be an NFL football player, and didn't have the best grades up until 8th grade. But my cousin, who was about 4 years ahead of me, wasn't getting letters to colleges because his grades weren't right, but he was a great football player. So I actually got excited about doing well in school. In 8th grade, I had straight A's, and ended up getting straight A's through high school as well. Played football as well, and started being recruited by Ivy League schools like Columbia and Penn, and end up taking a mayor scholarship and doing engineering at University of Penn undergrad, and anyone who's been and knows how the engineering curriculum, engineering and football didn't go together very well. So we did win a Ivy League championship ring, and but then stepped down and reclaimed my social life, if you will. And while at college, I also joined a fraternity and was hosting big parties at Houston Hall and Hall of Flags there on Penn's campus. And one of the things I recognized was Penn, although we're right in Philadelphia, there wasn't a lot of students coming from the Philadelphia area going to school at Penn. So I was like the plug, if you will, for what was happening off campus for Black and brown, undergrad and later graduate, folks who were postgraduate. And it was around the time when email was a disruptive technology, when email was, Netscape, and we were getting AOL emails. And I started an email list basically highlighting events going on off campus in Philadelphia. It was called urbanphilly.com back then. And eventually that email list grew to over 30,000 subscribers. We created a web platform that basically had Monday through Sunday. And we had over 3,000 event marketers who would upload events eventually into our web platform. And we had advertisers who would advertise on the web platform. We had 30,000 subscribers who would go there with an email list that would go out. And so we were advertising events, working with the city, like Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance back then. It's now the Visit Philadelphia and other institutions that were looking to bring people into the city and to sell the city and retain talent. Around that same time, Campus Philly was started. John Herman, who's also a Penn alum, actually before that was Philly Tonight. He bought the database and started Campus Philly. So a lot of those organizations started back then as well. And later, as I matured, getting past kind of like we were promoting a lot of different arts and cultural events and parties. And actually on campus at the time was John Stevens, was maybe a year or 2 years younger than me. And he was doing events at the 5 Spot on down off of Mark Street, around 2nd Street. And John Stevens today is John Legend. So he's a Penn alum. He was actually doing concerts down in like a little small speakeasy spot in Philadelphia, along with so many other like music, soul child. So Philly just has a rich culture, and many people were stuck on campus in this campus bubble what wasn't getting out into the city. So we were able to kind of bring that to bear. And later you had social media platforms like Facebook and MySpace and other, back then, that then started to suck all the air out of the, as far as advertising, and people started using social media platforms for a lot of the work we were doing. So I actually turned Urban Philly into a professional network. Instead of promoting thousands of other events all throughout the city, we started actually hosting our own events. And we were doing after-work networking events, and we called it the UPPN network, Urban Philly Professional Network. And so I started doing after-work events. Although we still had the Urban Philly going on, we created a whole new list. And out of those 30,000 subscribers we had, that, we got to 30,000, not in the most scrupulous ways. Back then it wasn't any, opt-in system. It just basically copy and paste your friend's whole BCC list or copy list, and you add them to the list. So out of that 30,000, we had about 7,000 who rejoined us, who were interested in kind of networking and after work events and things of that sort. And that has grown to over 20,000 today as well, more with a system of opt-in lists and things of that sort. And what happened was I started to go from being this kind of quote unquote party promoter to a convener in the city of Black and brown professionals, and organizations started asking me to serve on boards. And Philadelphia, Young Involved Philadelphia was one of the first boards I joined. And then it was Philadelphia Film Society. In 2010, actually 2009, I joined the board for the African American Chamber of Commerce, and then the board elected me to be the chair of the board. So I was 32 years old, and I'm chairing the board for African American Chamber of Commerce, a pretty important institution in the city. Mayor Nutter at that time appointed me to PIDC's board, which is a big financial institution here in the city. And since then, I've served on a dozen plus boards, and it was baptism by fire at first. But one of the things I recognized was board service. Not only was I, bringing, I believe, the value to these boards and bringing a diverse perspective, because many of them did not have much diversity as far as racial diversity on the board. But I also realized that it was a like a secret society, if you will. It was a social club of some of the most influential leaders in the city. And my social capital started to go to a next level. And I also had the opportunity to sit in a bird's eye view of how organizations were running, from, you know, few small multi-million dollar organizations to organizations in the hundreds of millions of dollars, which was, you know, opportunity for me to also see just some of the needs in the market and some of the social impact challenges that organizations were having. And I've also built some other businesses that had me traveling and speaking during a period of time. And those convergence of skills, you know, in 2017 led to us starting Diverse Force and turning kind of this professional network into a, you know, being very strategic about how do we cultivate pipelines of talent, diverse talent, to be in leadership roles. And that's kind of the birth of Diverse Force in 2017.
Wow, you know, I didn't know all of that. I knew most of that, but I did not know all of that. And I think it's just, yeah, I mean, even being more visionary, and I like the way that you took, you know, everything was like value add, but you were following things that seemed to almost, for lack of a better word, organically match your skill set and how it was building and developing. You know, you had a network, you kept on leveraging your network, but then that was aggregating a larger network, and there's impact going on both sides here. And um, you know, I really like flipping the party promoting. You know, I think there's so much in social. You know, we learn so much. We're social beings, right? And we learn so much outside the classroom, outside of work, as much as we do inside. So, any way to merge those two, especially for people of color, I think is incredibly important when you know, really trying to create a culture of belonging here, and feel like people, you know, have tools and access,
Mhm.
uh, you know, to belong and to create community, and things like that. So you mentioned Diverse Force, Suleiman, and I do want to talk a little bit more about Diverse Force, and maybe starting with Diverse Force and the recruitment and placement service of it. And then maybe then talking about Diverse Force on Boards, and how did Diverse Force on Boards, that idea again, like sprout out of Diverse Force, period, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'll flip it a little bit, because
Sure.
Diverse Boards actually came first, although we had in mind the recruitment services down the line as well.
Absolutely.
It's probably a lot more connective tissue to our UPPN network was the opportunity to give back in meaningful ways, and to build that connection and social capital for folks. And my experience serving on boards, I recognized it was kind of a secret society that people didn't really know about, you know, that and I started being asked to serve on more boards than I could say yes to. So I started recommending other people to serve on boards. And I think many of them didn't really understand the value. They didn't understand why and how to operate on the board. And then I sat across the table with folks who were on the board. And many times they were quiet, you know, people that I knew could bring so much value, and many times just were rubber stamping and not necessarily speaking up and having their voice really heard. I always say, you know, it's not about just having black and brown faces in high places, but to make sure your presence is felt in the boardroom. So it made a lot of sense to start. I thought the best bridge to kind of the leadership development and talent solutions was to start to have this large network we have to train and match them to the nonprofit board. So we started Diverse Force on Boards in 2017, and we started with our cohort 1. Since then, we've graduated now 10 cohorts, as you know. We're on cohort 11 now, 282 alumni of the program. And we filled over 200, and those alumni have filled 270 board seats all throughout the region. We have over 500 nonprofits who signed up as nonprofit matching partners. So this huge ecosystem, but it's one thing to be a board member, is another thing to be on the execution and management team. And although we were diversifying the boards, we still found that many of the nonprofit organizations that are solving some of our society's biggest challenges are also still led by predominantly white-led leaders in the space. So it was a natural, I think, progression for us to go from not just diversifying the boards, but also diversifying leadership. And, you know, in true diversity, in reality is, you know, our executive search team, we have 7 full-time folks who solely focus on doing executive search on our team and making sure that the process is equitable, that there's a diverse slate of candidates. So that's diversity across the board, but having at least 2 candidates of color in that final slate. Because the reality is you have the Rooney Rule that, sports tried, and they say, you have to have at least 1 candidate of color. But, Harvard did some research and realized that and recognized that if you just have 1 candidate in the slate, whether it's gender diversity, whether it's racial diversity, in that slate and just 1 candidate, it's kind of like tokenization. And the reality is psychologically, that person tends to not get hired. In fact, there's almost a 0% chance of that person being hired if it's just 1 person in the slate. But if you have at least 2 or more, it's actually 192 times more likely to actually hire a diverse candidate when you have diversity in that slate. So we were very intentional to make sure that we brought, advertise and recruit across the board, but making sure there's a diverse slate at that final slate where you have qualified candidates, just as qualified candidates. And many times that diversity comes in different pathways that people got there, but having a truly competency-based approach to the search and really assessing people for competencies versus what college they went to, or even potentially what pathway they got to get to those competencies as well. And what's happened is we have done over 50 plus executive searches for organizations all throughout the region over the last few years. And 80% of those executive searches resulted in people of color in those roles, 70% gender diversity as well. So we're kind of defying the odds on a lot of these roles that we're now placing folks in. So that's been great. And now we're in the room, if you will, when those decisions are being made, where I saw serving on boards and talking to a lot of our alumni of our board programs, or also talking to folks that are part of our network. They would always talk about how they were always the number 2 candidate. It's like at the end of the search, they were always number 2. Like they were good, but just not good enough, right? Always the almost candidate, but never getting those roles. But so now we have the opportunity to be in the room and be consultative with organizations that do want to be more diverse. Many times they're dealing with boards with a lot of biases. They're dealing with team members who have a lot of biases. So we try to make sure we help eliminate the bias, make sure we put language to why potentially a person is not a good fit. We don't let people off the hook and just say, oh, they're just not a culture fit, and as if that's a viable answer to just across the board. Like I wouldn't like to have a beer with that person, but instead say, what's the culture add that you're looking to have?
Right.
You have, if you're trying to always have fit, you're going to have the same people in the room all the time. But what kind of cultural ads are you looking to have within your organization? Sometimes it's just a paradigm shift to help people understand and why they're not getting the diversity they're looking for as well. So our team does a great job of doing that, just being consultative, not shaming or blaming people throughout the process, but helping them to just fill in the blind spots and let them ultimately make the final decision, but with some insight and perspective to help them find the best candidates in those situations.
Yeah, I think I like that approach. You want to be inviting and kind of open up the lane to talk about the challenges too, without, for lack of a better word, scaring orgs away. Sometimes they think it's too difficult, they won't go down that path, but nobody wants to be seen as a failure. But at the same time, you won't make progress unless you started actually addressing the issues. So I think and by the way, diverse for the audience, diverse for them boards also works with Claire and Impact Ed, Claire Robertson Craft, who's a big star over here at Fels as well. So it's a really well-run program. Sulaiman already said they're on their 11th cohort, and I can't even believe they're on their 11th cohort already. But Sulaiman, I mean, you're on your 11th cohort. You're starting to build an alumni network now. Of these board members who are now on these boards in the area. What do you think? I mean, other than just continuing to scale up and have more cohorts, any ideas on what to do with this network, this alumni network that's building? Because I completely agree with you. I think when I first saw boards in the city of Philadelphia, I saw the same names on each board. That was the first thing that I noticed. I was like, oh, they're like all friends with each other and they're just surfing on each other's boards. If you crack in that group, you're good, right? You'll get invited to all types of boards. But to get in that group, you usually got to know one of the people on one of those boards. They got to vouch for you and all those things. But now it sounds like Diverse Force on Boards as an alumni network is going to have some scale. Any thoughts on what to do with that, or how to push this, this larger DEI agenda citywide?
Yeah, well, just one. I mean, one, Claire Robertson Kraft, she was actually on the first board I was ever on. So Young and File, Philadelphia is where I met Claire, 25 years ago. So it was this like full circle when we end up partnering on the Diverse Force on Boards program, which is awesome. People like Kate Houston at United Way was part of that team as well. And Matt Rader, who was right before us at. So, you typically have young people early on thinking about, who are civically involved, tend to end up running the city later as well, doing impactful things. But, Matt, if we didn't do anything with the alumni, just the nature of social networks and network effect, you're seeing connective tissue and you're seeing how people are working together in different ways. And so the social capital tends to create this network effect. And we're seeing people getting opportunities and careers, and a lot of it stemming back to relationships they've built through our network. But one of the reasons why we opened up the P4 Hub, so right behind me is our P4 Hub, and the P4 stands for Public, Private, and Philanthropic Partnership Hub, to advance racial equity and excellence. I believe in collective impact, that collectively we're stronger than the sum of our parts. And what happens is now that we have all these alumni who are touching every sector, they're connected not only to the nonprofit sector, but, tonight, I'm actually the new chair for mastery schools, and we have 24.
Congrats, by the way.
Appreciate that. And I'm actually missing a dinner right now to bounce over there to catch up with our CEO and the board, but the people around that table.
Tell them we said thank you, by the way. Sorry, keep going.
Tomorrow. And but the people around that table, executives at Comcast and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who I've had a chance to meet on boards like this. So the social capital of those who now are serving on the board, some of these boards have 6 and 7 and 8 of our alumni on their board because like City Year and others, because we tend to produce some of the most well-informed board members, not just, diversity, but they're just good, just quality people who are giving back and engaged on these boards. But now with this collective impact approach, we can bring people who are serving on all these different boards together to one, say, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing serving on all these different boards? And how do we work collaboratively, have a collective impact approach around certain issues? Is it healthcare? Let's bring folks who are serving on the right boards. One of the collective impact approach programs we have is we're working with the 110, which is headed by Ken Frazier, former CEO of Merck. And we were selected as a partner at our P4 Hub to bring together an ecosystem of partners to help to advance family sustaining career opportunities for young people who don't have 4-year degrees. And we were in a great position to do that because of our ecosystem and networks that we have. Not only do we have, employer partners from recruiting and folks that are part of our network, which is part of that ecosystem, we also have talent development organizations that are training folks and training them on the different skills. There's also the wraparound supports, that talent need in that pipeline. And we have alumni that's serving on probably every nonprofit, in the city that's handling different issues. So having that kind of social capital to make phone calls, to connect to people pretty quickly, things happen at the speed of trust. And the reality is when you have those kind of networks, you can bring people together to make transformational change. And I find that in a city, unfortunately, many times we're working so many silos. Like the philanthropic sector tends to hang out with all the other funders, and the public sector hangs out with all the other public sector folks. The private sector hangs out in these silos. I find the nonprofit sector is where those silos tend to break down a bit, and we want to accelerate that at another level, but also bringing that back into diverse audiences and the diverse groups as well, where that social capital hasn't tended to touch for many, many years. So that's where we see the opportunity for the alumni to come together and have that collective impact.
Yeah, I think that's great. And again, like I think just, going back to the whole ecosystem theme and how all of these ventures are building upon each other and connected to each other. And, one of the things that we talked about and we're just talking about the public sector alone, you hear a lot of our elected officials talking about the lack of diverse pipelines. And when there are sometimes opportunities and openings that others will complain that they don't have the talent, right? They can't find the talent or the diverse talent to fill those positions. So, I think that this is a solution that is countering all of those, what I like to call them myths. Um, let's go to the hub for a second because I know that's your latest venture, and that is the convening space. I've been to a few events there. I think it's a great space, by the way. It's located for the audience right off of Wayne Junction, um, in Germantown. So it's got a um, I actually consider it to be a pretty central location, given the access to transit and the boulevard and all of those things. What's the ultimate goal there? I know it's you usually don't see these hubs in these neighborhoods, right? You usually see hubs like this, central city, maybe a higher income type area or an area that already has existing or more business activity going on. Why Germantown? What was the vision there? And where do you see the hub going in its future?
Yeah, so it's three prong, at least where it's bouncing right now. One is we have 20,000 professionals that we would host the events all year and always have to do the brain damage around where to actually host the event. What the cost is going to be, all those kind of things. So it was an immediate value for us to be able to have a home for the programming that we host. So we host, anywhere from 12 to probably 18 events a year just ourselves with our network. We do different quarterly events. So it's our programming for what I consider like a citywide employee resource group or entrepreneurship resource group, 20,000 folks across the city. So doing great programming from that perspective. Two is it gives us the opportunity to bring our ecosystem together and be able to create events as well with partners. So we do events like we did an event recently with Philadelphia Foundation and brought, executive directors of nonprofits together with philanthropic partners and talk about that. We in the beginning of November, we did an event, we called it Art, Wine, and Politics, where the Linfest Institute sponsored the event, and we brought our audience, 200 plus showed up. We were able to have artists actually showcase their art, and we had a conversation with 9 philanthropic partners came together to create these Vision Philadelphia papers. They did these research on how they can work with the public sector to be able to help make the city better. And the funny thing is the philanthropic sector was having a hard time connecting with elected officials. And, so I helped behind the scenes make some connections and meetings that happened there. And then we had a more public event. We had Senator Hughes, we had Isaiah Thomas, we had Councilman Isaiah Thomas, we had Representative Derecha Parker, we had Commissioner Omar Sabir, who's an alumni of our board program, and then we had Jody Harris, who's the CEO or new president of PIDC, along with Tina Wall, who's the president of Barra Foundation, and she was representing the non. So we talked about how do we have these public-private philanthropic partnerships and made it relevant for our audience. So we've done a lot of events like that. We had the first forum with 9 of the mayoral candidates in January on the eve of Martin Luther King. So we're able to create these really cool experiences and to inform our network, and many times have sponsors that can help us to resource those kind of events as well. And then just make it open to, partners and folks who want to just host events at the P4 Hub. So there's a rental space as well that helps us to sustain the space and make a community space and a place where people can have these conversations and and events as well. So those are three, it's kind of our events, it's a partnership events, and then this opportunity for, many times people want to support us and they may not be directly related to the work that we're doing, but by supporting and hosting events, hosting board retreats and hosting different events at the P4 Hub also supports us and being able to invest back into this community that we're continuing to cultivate and build as well.
Yeah, I was at the last Art, Wine, and Politics, and I thought that was a very well run, attended event. Tons of people. It seemed to be on time for everything that was on the agenda. It was just really well run. And another thing that I'm really impressed about the hub, that it's in Germantown, and I think that's a statement, to the community, to the city, that you want to bring some of this stuff to the neighborhoods. And I just think it's great. And that area's already starting to see a little bit of development along Wayne Avenue, or right near the hub. So
we designated opportunity zone. So we're right inside an opportunity zone there too. So there has been some investments that's happening in that area as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is your board role in industry. And because I think that's another key component to some of these things, especially when dealing with nonprofits, trying to get access to funds. You want to talk about your role in industry a little bit, how that's also connected to your work overall?
Yeah. So funny enough, so when I was at Penn, one of the entrepreneurial things I was doing was I was using refund checks to buy real estate.
Oh, really?
University here.
Nice.
And I had two friends who, one friend was laughing at me. The other friend was more intrigued. He wanted to be a doctor. And he said, you know what? You're buying real estate. I'm interested in what you're doing. You think I should go to med school or do this real estate? Videos that you make your own decision.
Right.
Our young man, it was Everett Sands, who's now the CEO of the largest fintech CDFI in the country. They're on track to do $10 billion in distribution of capital this year. So I was on his advisory board. I'm one of his founding advisory board members. And actually one of the partnerships, it was during the pandemic. He went from 5 million in revenue to 300 million in revenue business. And it started right here in Pennsylvania. And again, just the relationships, we were able to connect him with the Commerce Department, with PIDC, because they were trying to figure out how to connect with small businesses. And he was able to be a resource for them to work with the 18 CDFIs and be a back office, because they were one of the top SBA lenders in the state, or the country, excuse me. And they had all the technology to make that happen. And then when the pandemic, when CARES Act hit and there was $220 million that needed to get to small businesses across the country, you're not going to do that with manual applications. You needed a technology behind it. So he was actually, we were connecting with the state, and he actually did an RFP for the contract and ended up being the distributor across the state for $220 million in revenue. And then he ran that same proposal in California and ended up with a $500 million contract that ended up being a $4 billion contract over the now state of Illinois and others. And again, from parties that we were hosting, it was a woman who was actually coming up from DC to do our birthday parties in Philly. Me and 3 other brothers would do a birthday party and give and donate the money to nonprofit organizations right before the pandemic. And one of the people that would be on LinkedIn, and I didn't know what her full role was, but she's actually the DEI lead for Maxine Waters on Congress. So during the pandemic, she actually had me testify on boards and had Everett testify on fintech. And that was how he connected with Congress people across the country to actually be able to help them to distribute. And he became one of the top PPP, when only big banks were actually not working with small businesses. He was able to help small businesses bridge that gap. And so it's just a really powerful story. Lendistry is a growing company. And so they've been a great partner. They're an investor in the P4 Hub. That other friend who was laughing at me, called me a slum. He said, "What, you want to be a slumlord? Like, why are you doing real estate? He's now one of the biggest developers in Baltimore. Actually has 14 million square feet of commercial real estate, and he's on the Urban Land Institute, one of the Penn boards. He owns he actually bought the Nabisco building out in the Northeast, so he does a lot of big development. He does a lot of the opportunity zone development, so doing some of the biggest opportunity zone development in Baltimore and across the country. So you never know how you can plant a seed with some folks that end up making a big impact across. And he's also an investor in the P4 hub, so we stay close, and they're just doing amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think it goes that you never know what the true calling is. And by the way, for the audience, opportunity zones are just called tax incentive zones to try to spur development. Sometimes the taxes will be exempt by the city under a state. I think in this case, the keystones are the states. But just these are like designated areas, that I think our public sector would like to see developed, and they try to incentivize it. So it's always good to hear people taking advantage of those zones for said reason. Sulaiman, so everything you're done, I want to bring it back to public policy for a second. This is, it's Fels, so I think everything you're doing is in the private sector is like attacking gaps in policy that, others talk about all the time, mainly our elected officials. And we do have a new mayor who's also a Fels alum. So be very careful how you respond to this. No, I'm just joking. But we have a new mayor. She has a vision as well. And her part of her vision is also to continue to diversify businesses in the city as it pertains to ownership, and also create new pathways and opportunities for people of color in the professional sense too. How do you see your work aligning with the new administration and potentially helping the new administration?
Yeah. I think we've seen a lot of mayors come through over the years, and I think the mayor is really that's the bully pulpit. They're like the quarterback, if you will, and they can bring people together and champion partnerships and things of that sort. So hopefully, Sherelle, Mayor Parker is that convener that helps to lead initiatives around this kind of work. So. She's coming behind 99 other folks who
Literally.
For a lot of work. So she has some work to do. One thing that I'll just share my personal I've been a little bit disenchanted with, although I encourage people to vote and be civilly involved, I don't put too much stake in the public sector to solve everything. They only have a short period of time in there, so we've tried to build a infrastructure that can work with the mayor and support the mayor and city council, or work without. One of the initiatives that we did right before we started Diverse Force, because when I came back into the city and saw just what was happening in gentrification, we started, and it was the Black Lives Matter initiatives are going on. It was a lot of and one of the things I said was, we need to channel this energy to the polls, right? Protests and demonstrations without legislation just leads to frustration. And so we actually bought URLs to blackvotersmatter.org and .com and actually started events around Black Voters Matter, and was getting folks out, and New York Times was reaching out and all kinds of things. And it was right before Mayor Donald Trump was elected, and it was like a interesting time. And you may know Black Voters Matter ended up moving on, and it's a big, kind of big initiative. They never reached out for the URLs. I still have them. I don't know, but we were the first to start that. But I had a chance to kind of just see how politics works too, because you were then behind the scenes talk, and it's a pretty interesting game, and I like bringing people together. Yeah. Unfortunately, some people would rather divide people in order to get their votes. It's just there's a misaligned incentives to divide and conquer versus bringing people together. So I love I think the public sector is very important to work with. But being beholden to them, or just, only using that as a tool to get things done, has been frustrating. for me to say the least. So I'm always here to support and work with, whether it's the mayor or people within the public sector to get things done. But I don't hold my breath all the time, to say the least.
No, I think that's a fair approach. I mean, politics changes very quickly. It's sometimes harder to sustain initiatives aside politics. And, I think us at Fels are big believers that government can't do everything. That's why you have nonprofits. Obviously, private sector can't do everything either. That's why you have government and nonprofits too, right? But it's important to have permanency that lives outside the government when it comes to these programs. And frankly, the more that these initiatives work outside of government, it creates less burden and pressure on the government, which then is less burden and pressure on taxpayers. So, win-win-win all around, So no, I think that's awesome. I think it's a great lane too. And there's also, I think there's certain movements out here that are kind of agnostic to who's in the seat.
Yeah.
So pushing, I don't think making the city more inclusive and creating more opportunities for people of color professionally is something that many local electeds will be against. Right. You would think that most would be for it. So
your point, really identifying what are those issues and agendas you want to really push forward in policy that's going to make things better. And regardless of who's in those seats, if you stay steadfast to get those things done, I think it's a much more productive approach than just waiting for someone to save, waiting for a personality to decide and save the city.
Yeah. And frankly, things can move faster, outside of government. One of the issues, the challenges that government, I shouldn't say issues because it's sometimes purposely made to be slow, is that things can't move as fast. So when you have a great solution, to your point, a lot of bureaucracy, it has to get through before you can even begin to implement it. So we're at 6:45 already. I think I'm going to open it up to the audience. I think we had a couple of questions trickle in during our talk. So I'm going to pass it over to Mindy to see if we have any audience questions.
Yeah, thanks.
It was a good conversation.
Absolutely. Mindy?
Yeah, thanks so much. This is wonderful. And yep, I'll encourage anyone with questions. Feel free to send them over to me by direct message. And then we've got a nice queue building up. So feel free to add any other questions. Okay, so for our first question, we have Jordan Stewart, who is an MPA student here at Fels. Go ahead, Jordan.
Hey, Matthew. Hey, Sulaiman. Nice hearing you guys talk about everything that you guys got going on in the city of Philadelphia. My question for you, Sulaiman, could you just give me an example of how your position on boards or kind of your social status has helped benefited others or kind of just changed the culture or even broken down some of those racial barriers that exist? And my other question would be, do you think that, even with your influence and your organization influence, do you believe that there are still some barriers that exist within the private sector or public sector within the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah. I think we got a long way to go. I mean, there's certainly barriers that are going to continue to exist, but to your question, I can definitely point to defining moments, I believe, in organizations where I share my story, personal story, and I was probably more proximate to some of the challenges that the organization was looking to address, and how my story was able to move the room in a way that changed, the outcome of how they go about supporting communities and things of that sort. So I think about all those defining moments where I've made those in those examples, and how if you multiply that by 200 300 people being in those rooms when those decisions are being made, and just helping with making sure that the blind spots are not because there's a lot of blind spots in the boardroom, whether you know it or not. So having folks with that cultural competency to be able to bring a different perspective is so important, and people who have the courage, because many times when you don't know how governance works, you're less likely to speak up And we just want people with those lived experiences and can speak from, from a perspective that many times is missing in the room, can speak up. I'll share one example, a tangible example. Actually, I was on, I'll say this is more like being on boards and things of that sort get you in other rooms. And I was in the room where a particular bank was giving away upwards to $1 million to organizations in our city of Philadelphia. And it was 3 organizations that were going to get these resources. And as we were going through the process, we were getting closer to I think it was about 3 organizations were going to end up getting these resources, and they were all in Kensington, fighting the opioid addiction challenge, which is a big challenge, is certainly an issue. And at this time, it wasn't, it was trendy. It was more, white community folks who were, dealing with the opioid addiction there in that neighborhood. And obviously, it's very diverse challenge. But I shared with them, and there were some other organizations that were advancing Black and brown communities in a way that scholarships and opportunities for them to get access to sustainable jobs and things of that sort that were going to be overlooked because corporate America wanted to come in and kind of save this, save this community that, and I just reminded them that Kensington growing up, it was an area of the city that was not welcoming to people that looked like me. I don't know, anyone who's grew up in a city, that was not a neighborhood that was welcoming to Black folks. And I was a person who grew up in a Black community. My father was addicted to crack cocaine, and he, was in intersection with the justice system. No one came to save him during that time. And in fact, was more criminalized, and to this day, between redlining and the mass incarceration and crack epidemic, there's no one that came to save those communities. And today we're still seeing the unintended consequences of bad policy back then. And I shared, after sharing the story, I said, it's a smack in the face that organizations that are serving communities of color, Black and brown communities, are still not getting investments, but all these resources are going to a community where we're dealing with the opioid crisis, which again is a big challenge, but it was not addressing the challenges of the majority of this city, of Black community that were in poverty in this city. And there were some other organizations that deserved a look at that time. And the folks in the room, that was I think it was a defining moment for them. And they were able to recognize that, wow, you know what, we are. And it didn't take all the resources from Kensington. There was an organization that got those resources, but it spread out amongst other organizations and more demographics that were being served from those resources in that moment. And the CEO of that bank, he shared later, he said, one story helped me to change my paradigm, and that's going to have a ripple effect on how he thinks about being more inclusive about resources in the future as well. So that's one example of how I feel like, sometimes it's being in the room, and I was the only Black person in the room at that time, I think changed the trajectory of those resources.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Our next question, and if you are shy and you prefer not to ask your question out loud, I'm happy to read it for you. So our next question is from a fellow student. Can you tell us a little bit more about the concept of culture fit that you mentioned, how it can hinder organizations from diversifying their boards and leaderships? What are some better ways to assess someone's fit with less potential bias?
Yeah, great question. There is a legitimate kind of culture fit, and those are more sometimes making sure that someone has that they're going to have the culture or the values that are less agnostic, more agnostic than, oh, I don't like, this person, I don't feel like I can just have a beer with them. That's how corporate America, a lot of times they define culture fit. Like, do I want to have a beer with this person, or do I want to go out and play golf with this person? Is kind of in their mind what culture fit means. Not the other things like looking at the values of the organization and making sure people have a mindset of lifelong learning, or more agnostic, ways of looking at culture fit. So making sure that culture fit isn't oh, this person went to an Ivy League school or went to the same school I went to, or this person grew up in the same type of household or community and thinks the same way I think. That is that is a culture fit that can derail your ability to be more diverse in your organization, bring that diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, whether it's either race or gender, just people who come from different backgrounds, if you will, to come into that conversation. And that certainly gives you the opportunity to have that constructive conflict that's important to really come out with better decision making. So I try to disrupt that concept with saying, what about a culture add? Who are you adding to your team that adds a dimension of diversity, a different perspective that helps you to have more of a constructive conflict that's going to help you have better decision making moving forward. So that's kind of where I was going with the concept of culture fit versus culture add.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, our next question from a community member. So you mentioned that you don't put total faith in elected officials to make all changes, but if you could wave the magic wand, what changes would you want for policymakers to enact that would help increase diversity and representation in policy, in government, and in general? So what could policymakers do?
Yeah, well, I look at change in three components. So you have just individual behavior change and motivation, right? Like when you're trying to change behaviors, you have to get to the root and be able to get people to agree to certain things. Like, this makes sense for our city moving forward. And you need an inspirational, I believe, inspirational leaders, whether it's the elected officials or not, that can get people to start thinking differently and start to have a certain values that they're willing to buy into. Second, you got to create a culture around it. You got to create kind of healthy peer pressure, right? To get people to now, I always say environment is stronger than will. Even when you want to do the right thing, if the environment is not reinforcing that, or punishing, if you will, softly punishing with peer pressure or rewarding the right behaviors, it's hard to sustain even the right behaviors. And then the third aspect of it is policy and structure to make sure that you have certain values and behaviors that you want to drive. You have kind of a culture that reinforces that, but then you also have to have policy that reinforces it, that rewards it, and that, you think about the benefit cliffs and things of that sort that cause, a person, they want to live a more sustainable life. They want to get a job, but it's like, but if I do that, I'm going to lose these benefits. And it's more a risk for me to try to go out there and have a better life than to just keep what's safe for me. Right. So making sure that our policies and our laws are reinforcing the behaviors and the values that we want to drive forward. So I do believe that policy is one angle of the lever, is a very important aspect of the lever. But again, that inspirational leaders, whether it doesn't have to be that one single inspirational leader, it can be, again, convening the right people to be on the right, that can have shared agenda, shared beliefs, and have these kind of micro community leaders on the same page that are influencing the folks that they have influence over to drive the right behavior. So I believe it's much bigger than, again, just policy. Policy is just, changing the laws, but at the end of the day, you got to change the hearts and minds of folks as well. And that requires a collective approach to that work.
Thank you. I think I'm getting word that we have time for one more audience question, and then Matt always gets the last question. But question is, how can Fels students become involved with P4 Hub? I think we had a student do his capstone project with you or with P4 Hub last year. But if folks are curious and want to learn more or get involved, how can they do that?
Yeah, what I would say is go to diverseforce.com and take a look at kind of our bigger ecosystem. All the links to our P4 Hub is there, and all the different things that we're doing. And feel free to reach out either through our website or directly with me on LinkedIn if there's a kind of a place that you see an opportunity to connect, or just be a part of our BBEX network and come out to the events. Everyone's welcome, regardless of your background. And We invite everyone to be a part of our network that's really focused on, again, advancing diversity and advancing inclusive leadership in our city. And if that's something that you value, then we welcome you to be a part of that as well.
Yeah, I echo that. I think for any Fels students that are interested in Sulaiman's work, try to attend one of his next events would be a great way to kind of see some of the stuff live and in action. I'm sure that'll spark some more ideas. So yeah, Mindy, was that the last audience question?
We can probably ask you questions all night, but I feel like to be respectful of time, we can go to you, Matt. Thank you so much, Sulaiman, for your time, and again, fascinating. We will have to have you back.
Be back. Happy to come back.
Great. I don't have like the craziest question. You know, my last question usually is what's next? You know, what's on the horizon? What are you thinking? Anything new big, kind of just going along, scaling up your current ventures, or?
So my team would probably rather me stop thinking what's next. We have a small but mighty team of 12 who is just phenomenal, and I have to surround myself with a lot of operators, people who bring me back down, because I'm always 10 years out of where things are going. But overall, we call it our CEO model. It's our community, is our education and opportunity lanes that we're in, and we're going to continue to build our network, our BBEX network, in the community, and engaging, empowering, connecting folks. We have 4K cameras in our inside of our P4 hub. So we're actually bringing people in from across the country into our ecosystem as well now. So we have our diverse force on boards network, is people even outside the city who are able to engage in that respect. So continue to build our community with events and programming. Our education component, we have our diverse force on boards program. We just launched a AI accelerator, teaching people how to use. We had 95 people sign up for it, and there's actually over 195 people. We selected 95 people, and 2/3 are online, a third are in person at the P4 Hub. We have 24 sessions. We're 18 in already, and folks are having life-changing kind of aha moments on how you can leverage AI to be more productive, to advance your business, to build apps for you. It's called game changers. We're actually showing people how to use gaming and app development along with AI. So, and kind of our education component, we call our lifelong learning, and playing with the words. I like acronyms, and life is leadership, innovation, financial fitness, and entrepreneurship. So those are the programmings that we're kind of building out at the P4 Hub. The board program is under our leadership. Our innovation is with AI and other things that we'll do at the P4 Hub as well. We have another 7,000 square feet we're building out at the P4 Hub. So behind that wall, there's another 7,000 square feet that we haven't even built out. So we're actually working there. And then on the opportunity side is making sure that we're connected with the opportunities to match people to real opportunities. So it's one thing to bring people together, is another thing to educate and train, but make sure that we bridge that social capital to opportunities. And our executive search is doing that. Our diverse force on boards matching is doing that. And there's other kind of avenues as well where we're connecting people to real opportunities to grow, to learn, to be on purpose. So that's the bigger vision.
Well, I commend that vision. I support it in any way I can. We want to thank you again, Sulaiman, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us tonight. I hope that I think the audience got a lot of value from this conversation. And with that said, I'll try to keep everything on time. We do try to run on time here. Anything else, Mindy or Colleen? Did we miss anything?
No, thank you so much for joining us, for the wonderful conversation. And yes, we can't wait to have you back at Fels, hopefully in person at the mansion at some point. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Matt. It was a great conversation, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Sulaiman. Have a great evening, everyone.